All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our private well class webinar today on Is My Water Safe to Drink? Common Questions About Private Wells. I'm Steve Wilson. We're at the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. And I mentioned this project is part of a much larger private well program funded by USCPA and managed by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And I'll talk more about them in a minute. Okay, so this is part of this national program I just mentioned. Our materials today kind of follow the course that we've developed, a 10-lesson class called the Private Well Class. This is not the class. This is a webinar that's meant to support and give you all a chance to answer or ask questions. So we record these. About half of this is content we put together, and the other half is answering your all's questions from when you registered. And then if we don't get to everyone's questions, which we won't, there are a lot more questions than we would have time for, you can also ask questions through the chat or question box, and we'll track those, and at the end, we'll pull those up. Yeah, which might take a second because I forgot to pull up that file, Katie. Oh well. So anyway, there will be time at the end to go over any questions you have today. So if something I say today isn't clear, or you have something further you want to ask, please feel free to put it in the chat or question box on the GoToWebinar window. Okay, if you're getting credit for this through NEHA or Illinois LEHP, at least for NEHA, it's a 2-year credentialing cycle for most folks that have those credentials. And that means that we've offered this class the 3 times that are listed below in the lower right. And if you took any of those, then you're not eligible if you're still in the same credentialing cycle to take this class again, because the core content is basically the same. So if not, and this does count towards your credit, and let's say your credentialing cycle started this month, then you wouldn't be eligible to take this particular class on common questions again until 12/1/26. And we offer these multiple times a year because we have new well owners who sign up for our class every month. And this is really to accommodate all the folks that are new and allow us to give them the same relative and important information that we would give well owners who were new 3 years ago. So there is a list of handouts on your GoToWebinar window, a certificate of attendance. It's a worksheet, the agenda, and the information you need if you need credit. Email us at info@privatewellclass.org. And also please understand that if you need this right away, that's you're waiting till the last minute, we may not be able to get to it. Christmas break is about to start. We have one person who does all of the CEU work for us, and expect this to take a week or two, especially with break, probably more than that, to get your certificate. Okay. One other thing that we've implemented is that we no longer offer partial credit. In the past, we had offered, if someone was there for 45 minutes, we gave them, or an hour, let's say, we gave them an hour. These are 2-hour webinars. They're scheduled to be 2 hours. If it's our fault and it's less than 2 hours, then we'll give you 2 hours of credit, even if it ends 15 minutes early. And a lot of times they end up going long because we're answering questions. And when that happens, if you don't stick around for the extra time, you'll get credit for the time you were here, but the 2 hours for sure. And so we expect people to be on here. The goal of our program and the reason we offer it free is because you all, especially the environmental health professionals who are here, it's kind of a train the trainer. It's also a chance for you to learn about other questions people have and issues related to private wells. If you aren't involved with private well work at all, then you probably shouldn't be on here in the first place. But the point is to learn about well issues and how you can help well owners who need your help in your local jurisdiction or in your capacity working with well owners. So I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. All of us work here at the Illinois State Water Survey. Katie Buckley is a water resources outreach specialist. Sally Dolan is a senior scientific specialist with environmental health. She is our EHP on staff. And Aaron Huggett is a senior scientific specialist also here, who all work on our program. And we run many things besides these webinars, our class, the CEU stuff, a lot of outreach, our help center, which we'll talk about later. All those things require a team, and we have a great one. So their names will come up in various times and over time as folks get acclimated, and yeah, make sure you know who we are and who you can contact. So RCAP, I mentioned RCAP. They're a group of 6 nonprofits. They're all regional. They work in certain areas, held together by this partnership that's based in Washington, D.C. Depending on what state you're in, we're in Illinois, so it's the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. If you're out west in California, it's RCAC, the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. They all work in rural spaces mostly, housing, economic development, mostly drinking water and wastewater, a lot of times on the small community side, and also with private wells. So there's 1 or more staff in each of these regions who are leading the private well work that we all do. They're the boots on the ground, and we kind of lead the online side of this program, working with the national office. So I'm going to mention a few things here. If you want to know who the contact is in your state, I'd be glad to share that information. I just need to email us again at info@privatewellclass.org. If you're an EHP or you've done any private well work, hopefully you already know a contact. Like the contact for MAP is the Midwest Assistance Program is Jesse. And Great Lakes, it's Cindy Brooks. Yeah, anyway, so those are folks you should know. They can not only help answer questions or go out and meet with a well owner on your behalf, they can also help you set up workshops, find speakers, all those sorts of things for events you may have, or if you're thinking about hosting, a workshop for the well owners in your local area, they'd be glad to help, and it's all free to you. Well, it's free to everybody. Everything we do is free because we're funded through a grant from US EPA, which makes it really nice that we can offer all of these things for free. So this is an assessment tool. It's a private well and spring assessment. This is just a front page. There's 18 sections. It's really detailed, and that's on purpose. An RCAP regional person can go out and meet with a well owner, or if they have a spring, and go through the entire assessment. Lots of different questions: how they use their water, do they have backflow devices on their spigots, what kind of pipes they have in their home, do a visual inspection, is their well properly sealed, does it have a proper well cap, have they ever tested? It's an opportunity, it's voluntary and it's free to the homeowner. It's an opportunity though for a homeowner to find out a lot of information about their well and get really good advice that's consistent about what they should be doing as a well owner to make sure that their water is protected and that their well isn't causing any kind of problem or anything they're doing near their well, depending on the geology and all that stuff. A lot of times they'll look up a well log and try to bring it with. Most of the assessments today come with, if a homeowner is interested, a free water sample, and you can discuss that with each region, but that they foot the bill for all of that. And so it's a really great program. They've done almost 4,000 of these around the country in the last 4 or 5 years. I guess more like 6 years now. But yeah, if you're interested, these tools are actually on our website. We can send you a link to those. You can download them and take a look at them. Again, you really have to have a little wherewithal about private wells to fill it out. It's not something that a homeowner could do on their own. Okay. And the reason they're really cool is because if you are with a county or a local health district that maybe has responsibilities related to the Safe Drinking Water Act, either for non-community systems or even small communities, it's really like a sanitary survey for a private well, but it's all voluntary. It's kind of like a vulnerability assessment, if you will, but it also gives us a chance, or the RCAP folks a chance, to educate well owners about their specific situation. Every well is different. I say that all the time, but it's really true. When you go to someone's home and you're looking at their well situation, you find everything under the sun, from a Folgers cap on top of the well as the lid, to wells in a basement, to a dog tied up to their well casing. So, just it's never the same. And the more of these assessments that are done, you learn so much about wells that really the folks at RCAP have become quite the expert on, especially in the states they work in, on well practices, all those sorts of things. But then again, it's also a chance to promote best practices, why you should test, why, if your well's in a pit, which we still find today, why it should be raised up and had an extended casing so that it's above ground. And also gives the homeowner a chance then to ask questions, even about the stuff that's on the assessment. When you mention a backflow device, for instance, a lot of times a homeowner will look at as with a deer in headlights. Well, what are those? Well, you can explain those sorts of issues, why they need to be aware, why if they're in a cold climate, they need to be concerned about freezing pipes, all that sort of stuff. I said over 3,600, this is from 6 months ago. Anyway, but also they do these assessments at the request of like a local health district or even a state health department when they get a call and they don't have the staff to go out and actually get there in a timely manner. They may call one of the RCAP folks and have them go out and at least do an initial assessment. And so it's a way to, we're trying to build partnerships all over the country with a lot of groups, and I think we have. And, we're very fortunate in that respect that we've been consistent in our program, and I feel we give really good advice, and so do the RCAP regions. And so because of that, it's actually it's been well vetted. It's not something that's fly by night. We've been at this for a long time. And so consider reaching out to those folks. And again, if you need a contact in your state, I can certainly get that to you. Yeah, and we also have a wastewater version of this now for on-site systems, so septic and advanced on-site systems. The one I just showed for the wells is also like this one now, in that it's a fillable PDF. You can fill out everything, even on your phone. You can download a PDF and fill this out in the field, or you can do it on a computer or tablet. And again, it's, some of these have drop downs. It's actually really well done to provide, make it easy for whoever's doing the assessment to work with the homeowner and do it in real time. So there's the wastewater one is similar. This is again for on-site wastewater treatment systems. It goes through a number of sections that cover everything from your standard septic and drain field to irrigation systems for the drain field instead, or advanced adding chlorine, removing nitrate or BOD or whatever it might be. It's all covered through this tool. So we're at the State Water Survey, which I know from even my own family growing up in Illinois that most folks, even in our state, don't know who we are. That's because every state has a state geological survey, but Illinois is fortunate to be one of 2 states now. There was only us for many, many years that have a state water survey. So basically, we're like a state geological survey, but all the water side of things, groundwater, surface water, atmospheric sciences, and chemistry are housed here. And so we have nearly 100 staff. Today, we do a lot of applied research and support both well owners and communities in our state. We do a lot of resource assessment, look at water quality problems in contaminated areas. And it's usually on the source water, aquifer, and surface water side, but also service outreach programs like this. We house the state's well logs. And so when a homeowner in Illinois has a question, we can look up their log if it's available and find information that might help them. Even water quality data. We've collected over 30,000 water samples that are all in a database that we can utilize to understand the groundwater conditions in any part of the state. So that said, we started in 1895 because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks. And so it's grown since then, obviously, but we've been around ever since. And we have records going all the way back for all of the communities, wells, intakes, water quality, all that stuff going back that long. So in our archives, we've got a bunch of really cool glass plate slides. This is a young woman who's working in our lab in 1930. This is somebody testing an old hand pump. These were outlawed in parks, I believe in the 30s in Illinois. But before that, they were just there available. And you can see that little tin cup off the edge of the wood planks. That was just there. Everybody used it. Everybody shared it. Everybody drank from it. That thing sat there in the hot summer sun, guarantee it's full of biofilms. And, that's the things we finally got away from as we learned more about the relationship between bacteria contamination and water. So this is Weldon, Illinois, is a small town near us here in Champaign-Urbana. Well drilling certainly changed since then as well. Kickapoo Drilling Company is one of our current drillers in the state. They provided us this picture, but modern well drilling is a much different animal, and a lot more information is gathered. They file logs, they have to get a permit. There's a lot of things that are required that make it more professional and provide information not only to us for the work we do in research, but also for the homeowner, for anyone looking. There's a lot of rules, at least in the state of Illinois, that when you're going to build a certain kind of facility, you have to do a search through the records first and before you do any of that, and look at the impacts, environmental impacts, including on wells. So the important points to remember as a private well owner, and this is, they're not regulated after they're constructed. So once a well's in place, you buy a home with a well. In most states, you're on your own, whether you sample in advance, all those sorts of things, but it's really up to the owner to ensure that the water is safe to drink and the system is maintained. You can think of it like you're the operator of a very small water system, the one that serves your family. And so there are a few states that require testing at property transfer, but there are no other rules like mandatory testing or, nothing's been done at a state level or federal level related to making sure that folks know how to take care of their well and they're doing their due diligence. And so that's what our class is for, is to try to raise that level of awareness and understanding so that folks can be better stewards not only of their well, but also where they're getting their water from, the aquifers that provide it, and protect that source water. So the other thing is, I've heard hundreds of times from people, well, my water tastes great. That may be true, but it can be the best tasting and safest in the world, but also things like arsenic are colorless, odorless, and have no taste. We have areas in Illinois that are high in arsenic. It looks and tastes great, but it also over time could really cause you harm because the arsenic's too high. And so the only way to know is to test. And now I grew up on an old dug well. I talk about that all the time. When it rained, our water was muddy looking or cloudy. It was not safe ever, and that's what I grew up on. But today I live in town, and I pay $60 to $80 a month to our community water supply, which is a fair amount, right? But they make sure my water is safe to drink. They provide all the infrastructure. They make sure the pumps are running. They test the water every 3 months for a myriad of contaminants, and they fix anything that breaks, a water line that breaks or anything else. So it's all taken care of. All I have to do is turn on my tap. If you're a homeowner with a well, those things are all your responsibility. So, and that's, including sampling, which is one of the biggest messages here, is that you need to sample to understand and be sure that your water is still safe to drink. Our goal with our program, and again, I'll talk about the private well class further in the middle of this presentation, but when you take our class, the 10 lesson class, it comes to you as a PDF once a week for 10 weeks in an email. The goal in the end is that you better understand where your water is coming from and what your well log says about your well, if there is one, so you know the depth of your well, where your pump's set, if it's in the well, if it's not, if it's a jet pump that's in your basement, why that's the case, if you have a screen or not, is it large diameter or 5 or 6 inch well versus a 3 foot diameter well. All of those things have implications on what you need to do to check your water quality and make sure your water's safe. And again, to know if there's naturally occurring contaminants or if there's any other water quality issues, you have to be diligent, understand your source, ask questions. And that's really one of the big goals. We have an entire lesson. Lesson 7 is just about finding local information. It's out there. There are people in your area that know more about your groundwater and wells who can give you good information if you just know to ask. And so you got to be inquisitive. you've got to trust the folks like your county health or local health district, and be willing to go to them with questions, or your extension, or even your local driller, contractor, some of those folks. And the other piece that comes out of this is by going through the class and learning more about things like, what is the difference between a drilled well and a sand and gravel well and a bedrock well? It gives you some information so that you can ask better questions of those sources, and it's more clear to them that you at least have learned a little bit about your well, and you're trying, to do what you can so you can manage it yourself. And lastly, again, sample your well, and we'll go into that further here in a little bit. So when it comes to sampling, that's usually, and testing, that's usually the biggest question we get. We have a lot of questions about, where do I collect it? What should I test for? How often? All those things. And so we're going to go through some of those questions now. As far as collecting the sample, the water coming out of your kitchen sink could be very different from the water that's coming into your house from an outside tap, but from your well. So once water gets in your water lines, it depends on the type of pipe you have. If you have any kind of treatment, do you have a filter? Do you have a softener? Are you using an RO unit? All those things change the chemistry of the water, and it changes what you're drinking. And so many years ago, I will say that now because it's been over 15 years, the Water Survey offered free water testing for inorganics and metals to homeowners in Illinois on private wells. And we actually asked them to collect 2 samples, one from their kitchen tap, which is the water they're drinking, and then one from an outside spigot. That's likely, if you let it run for 20 minutes, it's water being directly pumped from the well. It's much more of a groundwater sample instead of a drinking water sample. And that gives us a lot of information about the differences, what's going on in your home, all that sort of stuff. In the end, once you collect where to collect your sample, most likely is going to be your kitchen tap, but things matter here, like do you have lead pipes? If your home was built before 1986, it likely has at least lead, it could have lead pipes, galvanized pipes, or even lead solder through 2014. So you need to understand all those things when you collect your samples so you know what to tell the lab, because your chemistry will be different. So as an example, and this isn't about the treatment, but we had a home, someone contacted us and asked us to look at their analysis. And they said, the thing about buying this home, but it just had a wood cover on it. There was a big rainstorm that day. They were worried about whether their water showed any sign of, being influenced by the surface. So when we looked at the sample results, our lab folks said, oh, this is clearly rainwater. It was that much of an influence that they were directly getting water from the rainfall and infiltrating in the ground and getting their well right away. And so understanding all those things matters when you collect a sample, and as far as what might be going on with the well in the short term around that time. So yeah, again, I got ahead of myself here. So the kitchen tap and an outside tap could be very different because of the things I just mentioned. And so I'm going to show an example rather than talk about it again. This is a homeowner near us here, and from when our lab was doing this analysis. And so the things to note here are this is from the outside tap. So it's before any kind of treatment. It's their natural groundwater, and they let that water run for a while, and they collected a sample. The iron's 2.99, the sodium's 25.9. You can see on the right, the turbidity is pretty high, 29.8. The pH is 8.02. It has a little hydrogen sulfide smell, and the alkalinity and hardness are pretty high. Or the hardness is 351. Okay, so in their house, they have a filter and a softener. And you can see what that did. On the upper left, the filter and the softener have added a whole bunch of sodium, but removed a lot of the other metals there, iron, and lowered that. And the hardness has went down to 0.68, if you look in the bottom right. So the treatment's doing its job, right? It's removing a lot of things that cause hardness, and it's also, but it's increasing the sodium because they're using sodium salt. So this is an unintended consequence. Somebody's on a low sodium diet, if they drink a lot of water, this could be an issue, for instance. And then they added an RO unit. So after the RO unit, most things are gone, right? Less than the left facing arrows mean less than, and that's the detection limit for the treatment equipment or the detection equipment here in our lab at the time. And so you can see that an RO unit, which is a semi-permeable membrane, that it takes out many things. And so, but the one unintended consequence is now the pH has went from over 8 to down to 6.23. That's not really an issue. It makes it a little acidic. At that level, it's, there's a lot of natural groundwater that's below 6.23, so it's not a drinking problem or anything. It would only be a problem is if you had lower pH water to start with, and it lowered it further, and you're treating that somewhere where there's pipes after the treatment system. So, for instance, if someone had a point of entry RO unit instead of a point of use, which point of entry means at the house for the whole house, which you should never do necessarily. It's much more expensive. Yeah, we'll get into that. And versus a point of use, which would be like at your kitchen sink where you're using the water, it should not matter that the pH is dropped, but it's just something to take note of and understand that every time you have a treatment device of some sort, it's changing something with the chemistry. Just like an iron filter is removing iron, it's oxidizing the iron that's in solution and removing it. That's so you don't get red stains on your porcelain and clothes and stuff like that. Okay, so so what should you test for? I'm gonna caveat this by saying every situation is different. You need to understand information about your well, where your water is actually coming from. I mean geologic formation there. If it's a shallow dug well, it's mostly infiltrating from the shallow soil type material that's at the surface. If it's a 200-foot well, it's either going to be sand and gravel or in bedrock. And knowing if there's natural contaminants there, and I'll show examples of that here in a second. But the best thing to do is to contact your county or state or local health department and ask, are there any natural contaminants in our aquifers here and in our county or our area? If you're in some parts of the country, they'll say, yeah, there's uranium, or others may say, yeah, we have arsenic, or there's a wide selection, if you will, of natural occurring things, metals especially, that could be a problem. So also ask, if you call the state office for whoever the well records folks are, and that's a simple Google search of Illinois water well logs, and we'll pop up, and so our state geological survey. Co-op Extension's a good group to go to. Your county extension agent, they may have some advice, or at least I know in Illinois, all of our county agents aren't well versed with wells, but there's 2 or 3 extension staff that do a lot more, and they can lean on those folks to help. So ask, again, be inquisitive. That's the whole thing. So sample advice. One is to sample for coliform bacteria and nitrate every year. And it's not because you're worried about coliform or nitrate necessarily. Coliform bacteria itself is not a health hazard. It's E. coli or fecal coliform that are. And nitrate, elevated nitrate's bad for pregnant women and babies because it causes blue baby syndrome. But it's not regulated as a contaminant to affect folks more than about a year old. But the reason we test for it is because they're so ubiquitous in the surface of our environment that if you have coliform or you have elevated nitrate, there's some background nitrate always, that means there's likely a pathway into your well from the surface. And that's the bad part. That means that if anything else is spilled or any other kind of bacteria is near the surface could get washed into your well. It's an indicator that you may have a well sealing problem. And it doesn't mean your well's safe or your well water is particularly safe if you haven't tested for other things like arsenic. And so I want to make that distinction because I know in some places they sample for coliform and nitrate and like, oh, my well's safe. That's not what that test is for. It's to indicate that your well's properly sealed and not going to let things in from the surface. And so it's important to understand that. So a couple examples. This is from Rhode Island Department of Health. All the little dots there are where there used to be orchards, and they used arsenic as a pesticide on those orchards for, long time. Some cases probably over 100 years. And so now the soil and some of the groundwater in those areas are contaminated with arsenic. And so if you're near an old orchard, they've mapped those at this scale. That's not that helpful, but it's just to point out that it's not a bad idea in most places in Rhode Island to go ahead and sample for arsenic. The splotch in the middle, if you will, is actually where there's naturally occurring beryllium. When I found this on their website, many years ago, probably at least 10 years ago, I'd never heard of beryllium being a regulated contaminant, but it is. It has health effects. Communities have to make sure it's not in their water. It's on the primary list of contaminants on US EPA's website that every public water supply has to make sure they are below a certain standard. And so if I'm in this area, I would recommend to a homeowner sample for beryllium. It does have health effects. You can look that stuff up. But in most of the country, I would have never even thought to suggest that. And you don't find it very often. And it's really the one place where there seems to be a prevalence of it. And that's just the natural geology somehow caused that to be that way. Massachusetts has this on their website for their Department of Environmental Protection. You can put in your address. They've done enough sampling where they know there's arsenic and uranium problems in the bedrock there. So if you have a bedrock well, type in your address. It'll tell you whether you likely have elevated arsenic or uranium and what you can do about that. And again, this is state specific. They've done the work to map their aquifers and understand where there are these issues. And so more states are starting to get on the bus here, if you will, to do these sorts of public-facing websites. One of the better ones is in Wisconsin. So this is a tool that's developed by Wisconsin Extension, DNR, through Stevens Point University. DNR is the agency that regulates well drillers, wells, community water supplies, the whole gamut. And so these are all private well samples. And you can see from the chart, you can pick arsenic, iron, lead. You can pick whatever you want and then tell it to show you either county, township, or section. And so I just looked at county by county for arsenic, and I clicked on the county that's in red, which means the average sample is over 21 parts per billion, which the health standard is 10 parts per billion. And that's what a community water supply has to meet to serve water to their customers. So you can see on this little chart, though, in this particular county, there's a lot of arsenic. The average value is 35. There were 1,700 samples, 426 were greater than 10, and the maximum value was 15,000 parts per billion. At that level, it can cause acute problems. We don't see that in Illinois. The highest I've ran into is around 550, I think, which it levels down in the hundreds or at least below 500. Minnesota Department of Health has told us that it's really not a problem for anything but drinking. It's not a dermal issue. It's not an inhalation issue or any of those other things. But if I'm going to move like to Green Bay, Wisconsin, that seems to be the area where there's some fairly high arsenic. And I'm going to buy a house on a well. I'm certainly going to test it first or see if they have already added either some kind of media treatment or RO to eliminate the arsenic problem, which, luckily a lot of these things are certainly treatable. You just have to do your due diligence. But a site like this for the whole country, wouldn't that be awesome? Yeah. So what we suggest, again, is annually for coliform bacteria nitrate. Penn State, their extension program has a really robust private well program as well. They suggest 14 months, and I added that here because that's actually probably a good idea. What that does is that staggers your samples over a course of 6 years to different parts of the year. So some in the spring, some in the summer, some in the fall, some in the winter. And that kind of gives you an idea if you're always doing it at the same time, maybe it's, if especially a shallow well, it may be that in the spring if there's a thaw, or even if it's just wet, you may have more opportunity for those things to get in a well, and you're missing that if you're not sampling until August every year. So, and then if you've never sampled for inorganics and metals, this is a list we've come up with. And again, this is kind of a national list. There are other things, like I mentioned beryllium earlier, that we'd recommend that you need to find out and see if those things are an issue. This can give you a really good background on the chemistry of your water, mass balance of all that, of all the anions and cations and all that stuff. It also, if you do have galvanized pipes, what you should look for, and some of these things like arsenic and manganese are known to have health effects. So, and lead, obviously. So anyway, this is kind of a core list. Most of the labs and even the online services for this have many more constituents. They don't charge necessarily more than it would be just for these, just because of the methods that are used in the lab. When you're looking at metals or anions, there's one or two methods that are doing all that work, and they're going to run it anyway. And so usually you get more than these, but these are the things you need to make sure and ask for. Some of these things, like alkalinity maybe, or may not be, or sulfate may not be provided unless you ask. All right. So when to test, besides what I mentioned above, which, every 3 to 5 years, let me go back to that. The reason that's an issue and why we say every 3 to 5 years, especially in a deeper aquifer, the water chemistry shouldn't change too much. I have some monitoring wells that I installed in 1992. We sample them every 10 years. It's an area of the state where the aquifer has some arsenic, and each of those wells, they range from, one of them is around 3 parts per billion. Most of them are in the teens or the 2 digits, and a couple are in the hundreds. They're always at those levels. And we pump water out of those for a while to get fresh groundwater, because groundwater is always moving. So it's just the water moving through that. These happen to be glacial sands and gravels. It's picking up that arsenic, and it's very consistent. It's there's one that's like 42. It'll be between 40 and 44 almost, for the 3 times we've measured it. So that's why if it's different, then that's a red flag. And so some of these things could change. I don't have a good water quality example, but there was a small earthquake down in Missouri a number of years ago, and we had some monitoring wells down in southern Illinois where it changed the fracture patterns in the bedrock, and that changed the water levels in this well by like 4 or 5 feet. Water levels just magically went up by 4 feet in this well, just because of the connections between all the fractures in the rock and how that minor earthquake had changed that. So you don't know that other water source that's now getting into that area where if you start pumping that well, the chemistry might change. And so that's a good way to understand that and make sure that, there's not something else going on, like you could have a leaky pipe, and so all of a sudden it's causing a difference in the chemistry. And that's how you might find it that way. As far as when to test, or standard, basically what I just mentioned, but also anytime you've had to open the well or there's anything that's happened. I'm showing this picture from El Paso County, Colorado. Wildfire went through. You can see what it did to the aluminum well cap and all the wiring. That's a whole nother issue, but there's melted plastic that's dripped down in that well for sure. And so that causes a whole range of other issues. Drilling a well is very expensive, but it'd be hard to trust the water in this well if this happened. So I just, anytime if you've disinfected, you needed to do that because of bacteria or whatever, then just make sure that it took, their bacteria is gone, all that sort of stuff. As far as where to get it analyzed, every state has to, primacy agencies, so like in Illinois, that's the EPA, Illinois EPA, in Massachusetts, with Massachusetts DEP, in Wisconsin, it's DNR. They regulate public water supplies, and they have a list of labs that they've approved to do water sample analysis for communities and public water supplies. Try to use one of those. They're accredited. They've had to do extra testing to show that they know what they're doing. They're using standard methods, all those sorts of things. And that list, you can find it, you can look it up on each state website, or actually EPA. I don't think I show it here. Let me go one ahead. Oh yeah, I do. Okay, so we'll just get into that in a second here. But when you find a lab, well, also some states have programs for private well testing. The Iowa Grants to Counties program. Their state legislature provides money to their counties, their county health departments. So you can call your county in Iowa and ask them if you could get a water sample. They'll either cost share it or maybe provide it for free, depending on their program in each county. But it's an opportunity to get a well test. You're well tested or you're water tested, and you can look those things up. I know New Mexico even has a program that they're trying to identify all the septic systems and on-site systems in their state. And so they've created a program where they'll give you a free water sample if you'll provide them the information about your on-site system, if you have that information. And that way, because those are a source of contamination, and it's good to know where they are. And so, yeah. And once you find a lab, they'll give you detailed sampling instructions, explain if you need to store it. Do you get a small cooler bag, a freezer bag that you stick in your freezer the night before? So you send that back with the sample, all those sorts of things. And you should be able to ask them questions. If they can't answer your questions, I tell folks you should find a different lab. Labs should have the wherewithal to answer a well owner's questions. And if they can't, then I would find someone who can. That's just my advice. But the lab, they should provide bottles. A lot of times now you can even order a kit and they'll ship it to you with a return label with all the instructions, tell you what to do. You put the freezer bag in the freezer overnight so it's frozen. You take the samples in the morning and you get it to UPS and it goes back. There's a lot of things that have gone on even in the last 10 years that really make getting your water sampled a much easier experience than it used to be, where you might have to travel and go pick up bottles at a lab that might be 30, 50, 100 miles away, some of those things. As far as finding a lab, I just Googled EPA certified labs, and it comes up with the certification of labs that analyze drinking water. And then the first one below that is contact information for certification programs. That's what we're after. So you go to this, if you go down the page, there is a map. You can either use a drop down and click on your state, or you can click on the map for your state, and it will give you, I guess I didn't include an example, but it'll take you to, like in Illinois, it takes you to the Illinois EPA's webpage for their list of, there's a downloadable PDF that lists all the labs that either do bacterial analysis or chemical analysis or both, and you can use that. And there's also contact information then if you wanted to reach out to your, like in Illinois EPA, to ask them questions. They're not, they don't regulate private wells necessarily. Some do, some don't, but they should be able to get you the right person or be able to answer questions about labs if you have a question there. So as far as interpreting results, that's really the tricky part. We did a survey of folks on why people don't test. And one of the things that came back to us was that some people don't want to test because if they find something, they don't have the resources to pay for treatment or some of those things, which is really a problem, right? Or they don't know how to interpret the results. And so there are websites out there, some are better than others. Regardless, and I'm going to show you one of those. It was put together by a state agency, but you should always take them to your local or state health department and ask for a qualified answer from them. I know in Illinois, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the state toxicologist, he's more than willing to interpret somebody's sampling results for someone in Illinois. They just have to contact him, and it's really nice, and we have folks too, and folks we lean on from other health agencies and things like that to help answer some of these questions. So if you find something, if it's really, you shouldn't always resample to confirm, but if it's really unexpected, you may want to resample to confirm. If all the arsenic in a given area in this particular aquifer is always low, and a sample comes back with 1,000, could very well be that, in the lab, they dilute the sample, so to speak, to try to concentrate it with a smaller volume. And somebody made a math error, and, there's no good reason for an area that's low in arsenic to have one sample that's 1,000 parts per billion. It's not something that could be, it's readily accidentally contaminated in a sample, like, like bacteria could be. So, and if you've sampled for coliform bacteria, then get an E. coli test. There are times when you find coliform and don't find E. coli, but it still means that E. coli or anything else, Pseudomonas, other things could get in your well if there's a way that coliform got in your well, because it just doesn't live there. It's not a natural occurring thing in groundwater. And either way, you need to boil your water that you're using for drinking and cooking until you have a chance to chlorinate your well. So the one I said I was going to show you, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services developed this Be Well Informed guide and tool around 2015, I think. I know we had our first private well conference in 2017, and we had them come speak at our conference about this tool because it was very novel, and I think it's really cool. And so they did, and the way this works, anybody can go to their website, and actually now there's a national group called ECOS, the Environmental Council of the States, that has a website that houses their tool as well as similar ones from a number of other states. There's 8 or 10 states, I think, who now have a very similar website, and that's because they're using the same software, if you will, and they're all sharing it, which is great. Then they can put their own state information in here, and I'll show you when that comes up here in a second. But at the very bottom of this picture, enter your water well results. So I went in and entered 15 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter, same thing, basically the same thing. And what's cool about this is sometimes labs will give you results that are in different units. Some will give you ppb versus micrograms per liter, or parts per million instead of milligrams per liter, or whatever, or knowing that the standard, instead of some of these other tools, like if you look over here on the left or on the right, all the units that are in gray, almost every one of those says milligrams per liter because that's the standard reporting method. But not everybody does it. It may not be what your lab particularly did. And so this allows you to change the units to match what is on your sample report. And that's a big deal because converting is an issue for all of us, me included. I know we have a pre-test and a post-test. It's like 10 questions maybe for a private well class. It's voluntary to take, but we ask people to take the pre-test, and then at the end, after they've gone through the class, take the post-test. That partly helps us to show that folks are actually learning something when they go through the lessons. But we put a math question on there to convert units, and only 27% of all of the folks who've taken our class, which is up around 13,000 people now, actually get that question right. So I think that's really handy that they have this on here so that it creates less confusion, and it makes it easier for anyone with a water sample to put their information in. But beyond that, when you put in, I put 15 micrograms per liter, which the standard is 10. It tells you that they get a red X. It's above the standard that's considered safe for a public water supply, but then it also tells you what kind of treatment you need. The other thing we run into is folks who have treatment in their house, and one, they either can't tell us why, they didn't do any testing first, or they have much more equipment than they need. And so this is a way to look and determine what kind of equipment actually works for the constituent you find. And I only typed in arsenic here. Obviously, if you had a water sample done, you'd have other values, iron, manganese, a bunch of other things. It all matters. You put it all in at once, and it'll tell you, it may say that your water is likely not that reducing, and so you need to put or not that oxidized. It's very reducing. You might need to put an oxidizing filter in front of an RO unit, or you might not catch all the arsenic, and that's a real thing. Arsenic's in 2 forms, +3 and +5. You need to oxidize it so that an RO unit will better remove it. It can slip through if it's not. Further down, it kind of gives you information about treatment options, and then there's also information about, for New Hampshire residents, their fact sheet. A lot of that information is relevant to anyone, but that's one of the reasons why the other states have created their own version of this end of this. so they can provide materials they put together that are more relevant for their state, or maybe have maps of different geologies or things like that. So yeah, so I mean, this is a really valuable thing. If you just Google Be Well Informed tool or Be Well Informed guide, it'll be near the top of your search. Oh yeah, and as I mentioned, now ECOS has this on their website. This is a slide from this summer, so I'm not sure if this has changed or there's more states, but you know, here's the states right now that are participating in this Be Well Informed website. All free. You can select your state, and then it'll take you to a very similar form to enter your information. So, and I don't believe you need to log in. That login button is for folks that are working on the site. It's not for people to use it. Okay, so again, these are only a guide. Groundwater can be very odd. We have an area near Chicago where there was a lot of industrial steel manufacture and things like that for many, many years, where the pH of the water is 12, which is not natural. But there's actually, they've discovered new bacteria and different critters that can exist in that environment. Somebody here from the Water Survey had a nice paper about 15 years ago that got you know, a lot of play because they discovered some new species. So you just don't know what odd things might be out there. So even though for typical waters, these things do great, it's always good to take this to a professional, health professional, or your doctor, right? Either your health department or your doctor, to get a clinician to get their qualified advice. If they don't know, and that's going to happen, doctors have to keep track of a lot of things. Then hopefully they know someone to ask. Yeah, and we do. We work with some clinicians just because you know, we don't give straight out health advice. I'm a groundwater hydrologist and a civil engineer. It's not my role in the world. My job is to get you to the right people. In the end, they cannot tell you to stop drinking it or condemn your well. They can only recommend it. I highlighted this, I think I did, because that's starting to change. 99% or more of the local health districts and county health departments have no authority to tell you you can or can't drink your water. There are a few local jurisdictions. There's one or two in Massachusetts where they actually do have the authority. They've created their own rules for a local health district. They can do that, where if you have water that they deem really unsafe to drink, they can tell you can't drink it. And so if you're concerned about that, you can always call and ask what the rules are. And you know, it's likely that another nearby health department doesn't have that strict of a rule if you're just trying to get advice. And so I know the strictest rule related to property transfer, there's I think 4 or 5 states that require testing at property transfer. If you have a well, those results are shared with the buyer and the seller. The state doesn't really get involved on whether it's safe or not. That's up to the buyer and seller to deal with, except for Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, they've tied that to their building inspector and that building code. And if it's serious, if they choose to, they can force whoever, buyer or seller, to add treatment to remove the contaminant, or they can consider that a building not fit for occupation. And so knowing all those rules is a lot too, but it's simple just to ask. But it shouldn't keep you from going to your county health department or your local health district. Again, 99% of those folks, well, actually 100% of those folks are interested in helping you and want to make sure your water's safe and you're protecting your family. That's their job. So, okay. The other issue is poor well construction. I would say the 2 biggest issues we have across the country with contamination of wells is either poor construction or honestly homeowners who just don't really understand what they need to do to make sure their well's safe. And a lot of that's even tied to the well construction. I'll show you some examples in a minute, but you know, there wasn't any well code until the 70s, and in some states much later, like the 2000s. There's actually 2 states that still don't have well construction code, which is a shame, but that's That's their state legislature for some reason. Excuse me. So, but even the original codes, like the one in Illinois, was passed in 1978. It's changed significantly. But anytime a new well's drilled that meets code, even today, 5 years from now, the code may be a little different. That well that's 5 years old does not have to meet the new code. It just has to meet the code when it was drilled. So when those codes were enacted in 1978, any wells already in existence, including wells in pits, were allowed to stay in business, if you will. And that's what we still run into. We did a project looking at how many wells might be impacted by a new large capacity well field. And we went around 9 townships and inventoried every house, met with 1,708 homeowners, and students do this. We found, I think there was 40 some that were still in a pit, which, you know, before the 1960s, there was no such thing as a pitless adapter for cold climate. And you had your well down in a pit if there was going to be a frost line in the winter so that your water lines didn't freeze. With the advent of the invention of the pitless adapter, that all went away. Now wells come up above land surface as they should. There's also a lot of old hand dug wells, like the one I grew up on. My grandpa hand dug in 1933. It's still in use today. Shouldn't be, but it is. And that's just the way it is. You know, a lot of folks can't afford to put in a new well, but you have to understand what that means if you're using a well that's that way, not only because of contamination, but also a safety hazard. So these are 2 wells that illustrate that the best. The picture on the right, on the bottom, that's a dead goat. This is a well that fortunately isn't being used anymore. It was an old farmstead in southern Illinois, but it was an old stone-lined well that then somebody put a concrete culvert inside of, so that it stuck up about 1 foot and had no lid on it. So this poor goat came along and saw there was water down there, and that's how somebody found him months later. But that's, you know, happens a lot more than people realize. This picture on the left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology, which is the agency in Washington State that regulates well drillers and well construction. For a while, they had a blog. This picture is like from 2014. But this woman stepped on that plywood, and this time it broke, and she fell in it, and it killed her. And so, you know, there's a lot of problems. It's a little well house. You can kind of see the gray stuff all along the walls. That's the insulation that's probably mice and rats have been chewing on. There's a little funnel there, probably for oil for the pump. You know, they had it's just, you know, this isn't the way to have your drinking water source. There's no protection here. A lot of things fall in the well. You could, even when with just that little square that's open, if you pull the, you know, the piece of concrete away, you're likely to drop stuff down in there. Not to say if the building's not, you know, basically airtight, you've got mice, rats, snakes, everything can get in that, and they do. You know, 6 months ago or so, we had on one of the webinars somebody who asked a question about her dad's well. It's an old dug well, and the water smelled funny. And when they went out and looked down in the well, there were like 40 snakes living in the bottom of it. And so these are not isolated. That happens a lot more than people believe, and I would like to believe. And, you know, we've run across all kinds of things, frogs, you name it. So what do you do with these wells? Try to bring them up to code if it's possible. Sometimes, like those old large diameter wells, you're probably, well, the problem is that a lot of times a large diameter well like that is meant to get water from around the land surface because there's no aquifer. There's no sand and gravel layer, or the bedrock doesn't have potable water. And so you have a lot of bored wells, even if they're newer construction, that are meant to act like a cistern. Water seeps in from the water table and fills that in slowly. Overnight, you pump most of it out in the morning when you're taking your showers and everything, and then it fills up again during the day. And that's the idea, is, you know, it's storage is why you have a large diameter well. It may be that if it's an old well like the one I grew up on, we know today that there's sand and gravel at about 80 feet. When it mattered for my family, my dad wasn't interested at all in putting in another well and spending, you know, at the time it would probably been about $3,000 or $4,000. Now it'd be $12,000. So But what you need to do is think about how you're using your water. If you can extend a pipe up to the surface in a pit and fill that in with clay grout, pitless adapters are a standard thing today if you need one. We see wells and even pressure tanks and everything else that are completely outside in some southern climates, like in Arizona and stuff. But if you're in an area that's prone to freezing, you don't want your pipes to freeze. So yeah, if you can extend it, the other option would be to put in a new well if there's no way to make that one safe. And that happens, right? We run into cases where they have bacteria, no matter what they do to chlorinate, shot chlorinate. Their options are to continuously disinfect with treatment or put in a new well, because the well is just not safe and it's always going to get things in it. And there certainly are those cases. Same thing with abandoned wells. So because well logs weren't really required until either the 60s, I said 78, I meant 68 for Illinois, until the 80s. And, in New York State, for instance, they didn't require logs to be filed until 2000. So because of that, there are a lot more wells out there that aren't on file than there are wells that are. Many of those are abandoned today and not being used, and they need to be sealed and filled in. Like a well in a pit, they're a safety hazard and also a source of contamination. And what I try to remind people is, I work a lot with farmers. I grew up on a farm. They may have 2 or 3 wells that are out, old hand dug wells that they've just kept. Maybe they want to water a garden or do whatever. But if you forget about that or you sell the property, it doesn't matter who is on your property. If they fall in and get hurt or kill themselves by falling in an old well, you're going to be responsible. And, the way things are today, the other thing that can happen is sometimes you see this big hole in the ground. You think, oh, I'll just throw all my cans and all my waste down there. If it contaminates an aquifer, it might only be not only your well, but maybe your neighbor's well. Somebody gets sick. Not only how would you feel about that, but you might be legally responsible. And so it's best just to seal those. Here's some examples of that. This old well was in some brush and a horse managed to find its way in there. These 2 pictures are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology. And the second one is a good story because this man was walking in his backyard, had no idea there was a well there, and fell through. Somehow sod had grown over it, or grass had grown over it, fell into the well, and someone heard him yelling, and they got him out and he walked away. Super lucky. 45 feet, can you imagine? And these others are from, really prior to the internet being so widespread, when everything was in the newspapers. 3 of these are from Illinois, all different parts of the state, and I guarantee you people in one part of the state didn't know this was going on somewhere else. But the third one there is from Midland, Texas. Those of you old enough to remember, CNN carried live the rescue of Jessica McClure. She was, I think, an 18-month-old, 18-month-old, it says right there, who fell into a well and got stuck. And it was not a large diameter well. It was just wide enough that she could get in it, and then she got stuck in it. But they got her out. She's a mom of 3 today. But these things happen more than they should, especially because it's, there's an old farmstead. They tear the buildings down. They may not realize there's a well and basically cover it up, but it's, it's got a big hollow center somewhere. And somebody's just walking along, and all of a sudden, down they go, and someone may not ever be found. So I want to talk a little bit about the private well class. Again, it's 10 lessons. It's sent to you. You sign up with your email address, and it sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. Self-paced, you're on your own to read it. And coming once a week is about the right pace, if you will, for every person that says, could I get these a little faster? Or someone else says, could I get these a little slower? And so we've stuck with that, and it's worked out really well. So when we do these webinars every month, they're either on a specific topic or they're towards a specific audience. Sometimes they're for folks like realtors, but they provide additional information that we didn't want to get to in the lessons without making them too cumbersome. Each one is 6 to 10 pages long, and that includes figures. It also then gives you a chance to hop on a webinar after you've gone through the class or while you're going through the class. If you have questions, you can ask them when you register. So like the questions you all asked today, there were, 40 or 50 questions that we got. We'll answer 10 or 12 of those, and then we can answer anything else at the end. What I usually say about that is we'll stay on and answer questions as long as you all stay on and ask them. And sometimes we can't answer questions. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know, but I'll find you an answer. I'll ask you to email me, and we have a network of folks who are experts at different things. We work with a lot of different groups, the Water Quality Association and the US EPA and their research and development office, and we can usually find someone who has expertise, and no matter how strange it might be, and we've had some doozies. So it's also just a resource for each of the lessons. Well, I'll go through that here. There's a set of documents that we found on the web that we vetted. They're all from reputable groups that give you more information so that you can expand what you learn as far as the classes go. And then you can also call us or email us, and I'll talk about that too as we move forward here. So this is the front page of our website. You just click on Take Our Free Class. Click on that, and it takes you to a page where you sign up. You just need your email address. We ask for your first name, and where you live is just a state list of a drop down. And that's really one, so that we can show the folks that fund us that people from around the country are actually using this, and they are. We've had people from 9 different countries as well. Like I said, we're up to about 13,000 people who've taken the class, which is awesome. But when you think about, there are 23 million private wells in use in the United States. That's 58 million people. We have a long way to go, right? So we encourage folks to let others know about this. And it's a good basic course to help you understand what it means to be a private well owner, how to address regular issues, what things could go wrong, if you need to add treatment, what things to look out for, all those sorts of basic things. It's also available in Spanish. The URL's there below. It's all been redone in Spanish by, we're lucky here at the University of Illinois. We're a world-class research institution. We had a young man from the country of Colombia who was here on a Fulbright scholarship in civil engineering getting his PhD. And so he redid all of this for us, and it's been really well received. So I mentioned there's other resources under Resource Library. For each of the 10 lessons, the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. It's just really basic things: porosity, permeability, what the terms you need to know that affect how much water you might have and how quickly your well recovers from pumpage and all those sorts of things. But here's a list of other resources that we felt are relative and good to look at. And the private well class was written almost like it was a conversation with you as a well owner, and that may not resonate with some people. And so these may be better source of information if that's the case. So and for each lesson, again, there's at least 5 or 6, if not 10, different documents there, and you can click on those to download them. They're all publicly available, and yeah, they're pretty useful. We do webinars like today. We're recording today. It'll be on our YouTube channel. It's also under our blog posts. This is the outreach strategies. The last time we did that was in June of 23. And this is more geared towards professionals than well owners on how to work with them. Some things we've learned over the last 11 years on how to reach out to well owners, how to make sure that they understand that you're there for them, all those sort of things, and the things you need to do as a professional if you expect to get credibility among well owners. That's probably the big one, because you can't come in and have a grant for 2 years and then walk away. There's a lot of issues related to building trust, especially coming from a rural area. I know how much a lot of folks distrust anyone who's perceived government or university, and it's a big hill to climb sometimes. Funding and financing options. I think Sally will tell you, or Aaron will tell you, this is the biggest question we get on our help center, is about funding and financing. Unfortunately, for most well owners, there aren't a lot of options, and that's just the reality of having your own water supply. But we had the USDA folks on this webinar. I think, yeah, we did this, I guess the last time was February of 23. We're waiting for the Farm Bill to come out, because the funding through USDA to help with well owners who need a new well is tied to the Farm Bill. And so until that comes out and that program's in place, we're not sure. We want to wait because there's changes. And the USDA folks graciously helped out and did part of this webinar in 23, and we want to ask them back once there's all the new stuff's in place so they can update us all on what that means. The bottom line, though, is that it's likely that to have these funds available to you, you'll need to be at or below the poverty line for your local area. There are other programs out there, some that are funded by philanthropy, if you will, like Water Well Wish from the National Groundwater Association that might be able to help, but there's just not a lot of money available for loans or grants to repair or replace a well. So it's changing though. We're seeing, the Farm Bill from the previous 5 years was more limited than the current one, which also allows septic and on-site systems. And the new one is going to allow, looks like for more, even for adding treatment to a system where a water quality problem has been identified. So, the more and more this all gets brought up and talked about, the more, and your congressmen hear about it, it's making a difference in how, where the funds might be available and for what. We did 2 webinars on lead when back, in 2016 and 2018 when it was at the height of the news coverage and all that stuff. And, nothing's changed for a private well owner. And so we haven't updated that. I don't think it needs to be. But we have a lot of information on lead. We had Dr. Kelsey Piper, who's now at Northeastern University, talk about all the work she'd done working with well owners in Virginia and North Carolina on lead, where they have actually more corrosive water than like we do in Illinois. And so there's more chance for lead solder or galvanized pipes or lead pipes to cause lead problems in drinking water. So not only do we have this page or this webinar, which is, if you're curious, you have an older home, it's certainly worth watching. But we also have, if you just go to privatewellclass.org and say /lead, you can get to this information page that has a lot of resources. Like we know there's filters today, the point of use filters that go on your kitchen tap that remove lead down to a level that's safe. So there are ways to deal with it, which is the good news. And so, yeah, anyway, that's the information that's available on our website for that. We have a series of what we call training videos that are about a specific topic. What should I know about a shared well? I know there's a question about today. I'm not sure I was going to answer that, but it's amazing how many people share their well with another home. And sometimes those are family, or maybe they were family 30 years ago and now they both sold, now they're not family. There's a lot to take into account there. And, I'll just say the short thing is make sure you have an agreement with all parties involved that's legally binding, or you may find yourself in a situation, which I've seen a number of times now, where someone bought the house that the well was on. They decided they didn't want to share the well with their neighbors anymore, so they just basically cut them off. And then those other 3 homes in this one case all had to go in and put their own well in. That's a big expense not to have planned for. So yeah, it's worth it. Short, it's 4 to 6 minutes long at most, and there's a number of those, including on things like what is a sand and gravel aquifer or a sand and gravel well? How does my pressure tank work? Matter of fact, how does my pressure tank work is analogous to this particular video, why it keeps losing pressure. It's by far the most watched video we have. It's got over 400,000 views. And what that tells us is a lot of people have problems with water pressure in their private well. Maybe they've added an addition or a second story, or, added a bathroom up on a second or third story. Those all affect water pressure, obviously. And if you don't understand how your pressure switch works or how you can change your pressure, nowadays they're going away from pressure tanks that are the large volume storage at a certain PSI and to, a 1 gallon pressure tank to get your pump started. You can keep pressure in your line, and then you use the pump, a variable speed pump, in order to maintain pressure as you're using your water. They're not that new, they're fairly new. I don't know a lot about them personally, but our new version of the private well class, which should come out within the next year, will have some of that information in it as well. We have a podcast. It's just called drinkingwaterpodcast.org. We interview a lot of national players. Eric Egges from the Water Quality Association, Dr. McDonald Gibson does a lot of PFAS sampling. She's a researcher at North Carolina State University. Brian Swistock's now retired, but he led the well owner program at Penn State Extension, the most knowledgeable well person I've ever met. And he was a huge loss when he decided to retire. Very grateful for all the help he supported us while he was still there. And then Dr. Alan Wolf is with Boston Children's Hospital. He's the head of pediatrics for Harvard Medical School. We happened to meet through another effort, and we invited him on, and he runs into cases. That's what he deals with, is the odd cases where something's hard to explain or hard to determine what's causing these health problems in children. And sometimes it ends up being because of the well water. And so he's well versed in all those things. It's interesting to hear his side of things. And yeah, great guy. So yeah, I encourage you to check out our podcast. It's meant to be at the, like it says up here, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. It's not just private wells. It's also about small community water supplies and those issues. And in a few cases about septic that are coming out. Yeah, we've had 4 seasons. There's 48 so far. We do 12 in a season and then skip some time and then release them 12 at a time, 1 week apart. Our season 5 is starting January 2nd. And so, yeah, I just encourage you to check that out if you're into podcasts. And then the biggest addition, I think, to our whole program is our help center. So we had a phone number at the bottom of our page, and we get calls fairly regularly from folks who have questions. But now we've developed a formal help center with the help of EPA. It's actually linked on EPA's private well webpage, and it's a very robust system. It's got a phone number. When you click here to go to the help center, both Sally and Aaron, who are on the call today, manage this, and it's a lot. That's all I can say. I didn't put any numbers in today. But you can call us at that phone number if you'd rather talk to somebody. A lot of folks today don't seem to like to use the phone. So you can go to the chat bot, which is on the right, and it will come up with an answer based on all the questions and answers we put in our database, along with all the transcripts from our webinars, along with all the transcripts of our 10 lessons. So we're providing consistent information across the country on how to deal with certain water problems or water issues or answer water questions, including for on-site wastewater. That's not as robust here, but it's growing. You can just search, like if I type in, the topic of the year has been extreme weather. So if I type in flood, it shows me all the articles that deal with floods and flooding and how that might affect a well. So you can click on any of these. If I click on the top one, is my well safe after a flood? It depends on a lot of things. Was a well overtopped? How was well constructed? All that stuff. But we have a short video as one of our one of those 6 or 18 or 20 videos that we have. What should you look for? What can you do? What you should test first? All those sorts of things. So the whole point of our program, as I mentioned, I put this slide in here again just to make sure you all understand where we're coming from. The idea is if you're a well owner or if you're working with a well owner, what they need to understand is where their water's coming from. Is that a sand and gravel aquifer, a bedrock aquifer, or is it a large diameter shallow well that's getting water from the water table? Those all make a difference on the potential contaminants, how much water they may have. We get questions like, can I add livestock to my well? Well, that really depends on the amount of water you have available, some of those sorts of things. But knowing where your pump's set, it may be that in a very dry year, you think your well's dry. It may be that the pump was only set 20 feet below the top of the water level, and there's still another 60 feet of pipe before you get to the screen. You could lower your pump 20 feet or 40 feet and be fine and not necessarily need a new well. But you need to understand that if you have a submersible pump, what's really going on. And so it's really about all those things, as well as understanding your geology. And basic geology is really pretty simple. I can learn it. I didn't have any formal geologic training. And so I know you can. And just knowing enough about the type of aquifers you have in your area and if there's any natural contaminants associated with those, especially in areas like we showed Massachusetts, where they have natural uranium and arsenic. But more than anything, going through those 10 lessons will help you ask better questions. It's just that simple. And understand who might be contacts that you can reach out to. I guarantee you, no matter what state you're in, if you call somebody from your geological survey, they will get you to the person who deals with their logs, and or one of their researchers or scientists who help map some of the aquifers and all the geology in your area, who can give you really good information about your location as far as what you're likely to find or what your options are. You know, for us in Illinois, we house all the well logs. If a homeowner calls me and says, hey, I just bought 5 acres and I'm going to build a house in southern Champaign County, can I get water there? And you know, what kind of water quality would I have? I can give them specific information from nearby wells that will help them understand what they're looking at, and then they can go out, talk to a driller, find out what the costs are going to be, and do all those things. And then lastly, sample your well. It's, you know, to get your well sampled for coliform and nitrate should be less than $50. That's $50 well spent. You know, if you're like me, when I was a kid, our well wasn't where I could hit it with a riding mower, but we had other posts and stuff. I can't tell you how many of those I broke off or bent because back in the day, I was listening to my Walkman and on a riding mower and not paying attention, and I hit it either with the mower unit on below or just ran right into something. And so if you have a PVC well especially, it's easy to crack that over time. And so, you know, it's worth sampling to make sure that nothing's changed. You know, somebody could back into a well, all those things can happen. And again, our goal in all this is to help well owners and to give them targeted information and advice that helps them actually use practical information to help take care of their well and ensure their water is safe to drink. And that means why their well is important. They need to understand that and what it really means if they have to replace it. I mean, it's the price of a car in some places or more. In some places, it's almost the price of a house. So you need to understand how that works. So when there are problems, you can say, hey, you know, we don't have power, or, you know, our pump kicks on for a second and then kicks back off. Well, that might be that there's air getting in the line. I mean, who knows? I mean, there's things that you'll learn from all that. And also then how to protect yourself from any risk from contamination. So we're going to go on to the questions. I'm going to take a quick drink here. My throat is getting dry. Yeah, so we did receive a lot of questions I mentioned, so we're going to answer a number of those. Katie's watching the question and chat features on the GoToWebinar screen, and if you have a question, you can type it in there. She's tracking that and adding them to a Google document that when I get out of the slide deck, I will pull that up on the screen and we'll be able to go through those. And I do want to mention what we go through today from this point on, we do every webinar, but they're a lot of times different questions, sometimes not. But it's worth it to go back to our YouTube channel and look at past webinars. Even if you skip this first hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes, and go right to where it says submitted questions, you can go through and see what other questions we've answered on different topics. You'll really learn a lot, especially if you're a professional interested in just broadening your, you know, tweaking your knowledge about private wells. We end up researching some of these questions in advance. And yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, I learn a lot too every month going through and trying to prepare for this. So, and so does Sally and Aaron now that they're helping with the questions. So yeah, so it's worth checking out is my point there. So very common question. We answer this a lot, but I'm going to go through it because there were a number of questions about chlorination in the questions. And one of the questions was, do we have to shock a well? Well, the reason you shock chlorinated well is because you've had bacteria in it. There were several questions in there about, oh, I just pour bleach, or the people I bought the house from said to pour bleach in it once a year. That's very bad advice. You should only disinfect your well when it needs it, which is determined by sampling. And so you've sampled your well and you've got coliform or E. coli. That's an issue. So then you want to, again, like I said before, if you sample for coliform and it's positive, then you should get it tested for E. coli. But either way, don't drink it, and you should boil it until you had a chance to disinfect. We looked at a lot of different documents that different groups have put out about how to disinfect your well with shock chlorination. And this one from Minnesota Department of Health is the one that we chose to use because I think it's the most thorough, it explains things the best, and it gives the best advice. So things like pouring straight bleach down your well, 5% bleach is too strong. You need to mix it so that's around 300 milligrams per liter, and then you pour enough in based on the size of your well and the amount of water in your well, which is something you need to determine, or at least have a best guess. Then you put enough chlorine in there so it's mixed beforehand. Straight bleach will, it's an oxidant. So if you have brass fittings on your pump, it'll release those metals. If it's a bedrock aquifer and there's, arsenic or arsenic or other metals that are in that rock, it'll release them into the water. There was a study the USGS did where they were adding chlorine tablets or chlorine into a well directly, and they saw like 100-fold increase in some metals in the water they were analyzing after they did that. And so, the whole point is you're trying to kill bacteria, and it has to be strong enough to do that, but you could cause problems if you make it too high, if you will. So this particular document, it's available under our, I showed you those lessons 1 and 2 and all the resources we listed there for 1 and 2. If you go under lesson 10, there's a link to this. And I'll tell you now, after this was put together, 2015 or 2016, a few years later, the MDH decided to create a smaller version of this. It's not as thorough. It's honestly not as good. And they didn't do that. They had a marketing team come in. I was actually at a meeting where I told this story and had someone come up to me who was one of the regional groundwater engineers and said, we tried to tell them, not to do that because this was a much better document, and they didn't listen. So the one on MDH's website isn't the same one as this. I mean, it still has a lot of the same information, but it's just not spelled out as clearly. They tried to cut the text down. They said no one would read an 8 or 10 page thing. My take is if you're trying to disinfect your well and protect your health, you'll read a lot more than 8 or 10 pages, and that's not too much to expect. And so anyway, this is on our website. We still have the old version available because we think it's better. It's just that simple. And so as you go through this, it tells you how to mix it, knowing the diameter of the well, how much to add. You mix it in a bucket, all these things, and it goes through like use unscented bleach, things like that. Even what to do if you have treatment equipment and what you should take offline if you can, because it'll certainly affect those things. And if you have treatment equipment but you don't have the manual, you can go to the Water Quality Association and they likely have that information available. Or these days, if you just Google manual for, whatever 6-digit and letter combination version of, this softener it is, it'll usually pop up because people have been really clever about scanning and keeping all those things. A few things to note though. So chlorine only works under a certain pH range. And if the pH gets too high, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's start with the first bullet. Sometimes if it's been a long time, bacteria will build up in your line and it forms these layers, biofilms, and they're an entity of their own. They can harbor bacteria, all kinds of bacteria, Pseudomonas, Legionella, all kinds of things. If you have a natural groundwater system and your home is more than 10 or 15 years old, you likely have biofilms somewhere in your line. That's just natural. When the biofilms are, quote, this is the way a biofilm expert explained it to me, when they're happy, they stay on mind their own business. They're not releasing a lot of things. But when you go in and add chlorination and start killing things, you might slough off the top layer, but it could be thicker. And so when you test again, you're still getting bacteria hit. You might have to do that 2 or 3 times. And as much as doing this where you have to let it sit overnight, run water through all your lines till you smell chlorine, all of those things is a pain. It's not as much of a pain as having to add permanent treatment or to have to, find another alternative to your current water supply. So it's worth trying to do that first because that may be the cause. The other thing is it could be a continuous source. So in the instance of a dug well, let's say you have a 25-foot hand dug or even a bored well, a lot of times the geology will show that there's maybe 3 inches of sand at, say 15 feet. Almost all the water's coming in that well from that sand. So the sand is much more conductive to water. Water can flow through it a lot easier. And so, you've got this well, most of the water is probably coming into that sand and then moving off to your well, especially when you pump, you lower the water level in your well, it pushes water towards your well. So if there just happens to be bad luck and you have this thin sand that goes all the way back over to your septic system or over to your drain field or over to near your feed lot and it's shallower, you may have a continuous source, which is what I'm talking about there. And if that's the case, no matter how many times you disinfect, no matter what you do, as long as you're using your septic and as long as you're having your livestock, you're going to have issues with bacteria showing up. And if that happens, the only choice is to add continuous disinfection. And I say continuous disinfection because there's several ways to do that. The most common is to add a chlorinator system into your line. So you're adding chlorine, not the tablets. I know a few states still allow that on their well. That isn't what, those shouldn't be allowed. They're not consistent, but actually using a chemical feed to add chlorine continuously. So your water would taste like city water, depending on how you have that set up. But it's important to disinfect so that no one's getting sick, especially, the well I grew up on was always contaminated and I got used to it. So I didn't get sick over time, but when I left for college and was gone for 3 months straight, I came home and tried to drink our water. I was sick as a dog. I got diarrhea, the whole 9 yards. And that's how it was explained to me, is that your body builds up a resistance or has that bacteria in your stomach and your gut. And when you lose that, when I went on city water where I was drinking chlorinated water, it's just slightly chlorinated to kill bacteria. Then I lost that in my stomach, my gut, if you will. And now when I drink that water, it makes me sick. So think about if your kids have moved away or you have grandkids and they're not at your house, but they come there for the holidays or whatever, it may not make you sick, but it may make them sick. And that's the other reason why you need to test, because there's nothing worse than, having the holidays spent that way, for one. The other way to disinfect is with UV, ultraviolet light. Those have become much more affordable. They do require a filter up front because any solids in there are going to block the UV from doing its job. You can talk to a treatment dealer about ultraviolet light. The nice thing is it's effective and it kills everything. Viruses, every kind of bacteria. And it's just, it's eradicating them and making them non-virulent, if you will. And so you see that more commonly these days. But again, don't add UV just to be safe. Make sure you have a bacteria problem. I mean, it's really up to you. But natural groundwater can be really great water just as it is. And there are bacteria in water. I'll get to that in a minute. We were asked a question about all kinds of bacteria. Most of those are totally innocuous, and we drink them every day. We breathe them in every day, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so third, the chemistry of the water. There are places where the pH can be above 8, and when that happens, chlorine's just not effective. So you could chlorinate the heck out of your well with shot chlorinate it, and it may not just be effective. And there's ways around that. I don't know a lot about how to do that, but I know there are more and more folks recommending you use plain white vinegar to lower the pH of a high pH water, and then you add the chlorine, and you just kind of mix it in as part of the process. And I say waiting on VT, Virginia Tech research to get better guidance. That work was done. What came out of it wasn't quite what I was expecting. They looked at all the different states and what they're recommending for shot chlorination, and they're very different in some cases. And they were trying to standardize that and say, here's the 9 things you need to have in there. But it didn't really address the, I don't believe it addressed the vinegar thing. But we're hoping to look into that ourselves. And, I do know it's recommended by some folks out there in the groundwater industry as a way to lower the pH so that chlorine will be more effective. So and adding chlorine raises the pH, so it makes it worse. There could be other things in the water reacting with the chlorine. So you may mix it at a certain dose. If it's an old well and it's got a lot of total dissolved solids or whatever it might have in it, or you're running into biofilms in your lines, you know, to kill bacteria, you're using the bacteria. And so it may be that you're not getting the chlorine to all the places in your water line. So to shock chlorinate a well properly, you mix it based on the amount of volume of water you have. The first thing you do is you run one hose back into the well and you turn on the spigot. And that hose circulates the water. You just create a loop. You're putting it right back in the well, and you do that until you've got chlorine in your hose. You smell it. You know it's all mixed up. It's all at a uniform concentration. Then you shut that off, and then you go to every spigot, faucet, toilet, shower, everything, and you turn them on until you smell chlorine come out in the water. Then you shut it off and you leave it. And it's best to do that at the end of the evening, go to bed, let it sit for at least 8 hours if you can. And then the next day, you flush them all out until you don't smell chlorine anymore. You get all the chlorine out. So it shouldn't be an issue for drinking it after that. Before you drink it though, you test it to make sure that there's still not bacteria in it. And that's what this whole page was about. Well, sometimes you'll still have bacteria, and if you do, then you shouldn't be drinking it until you've got it taken care of. So, and there's other little things. You need to be careful how you collect the sample. You can cause bacteria problems with your hands. You should always wash them first. I would recommend, which I used to be on the other side of this, some tests are just presence or absence. It's either positive or negative, and others quantify the number of bacteria. Colony forming units, CFUs. I recommend you get a test that tells you how many CFUs there are. If it's 1 or 2 or 3, then I would retest because it's likely could have been something that contaminated the bottle or your hands or even off the faucet. If it's 200, then you have bacteria in your water. It's kind of the way to look at that. So it's better to do a quantified test. You know, I used to believe that if it was positive, it's positive, but it does make a difference, and it's good to have that information, is what I've learned. So, testing. Previous owner poured bleach directly into the well to get rid of what he termed gunk. Is this safe? Lots of red clay sediment and water. Georgia State University certified well safe prior to my purchase 2.5 years ago. I bought a testing kit earlier in the year and tested okay. Should I assume it's still okay? I think I just answered the first part of that question about what to do there. And the gunk, I would say it's probably iron bacteria causing that problem, and otherwise the chlorine wouldn't do a lot to it necessarily. It's already oxidized. So once you have iron bacteria, it's pretty pervasive, if you will, in groundwater. And either way, if you're going to pour things in your well, I would follow the recommendations from the Minnesota Department of Health guidelines I just talked about. I would not pour bleach directly into your well for the reasons I just mentioned. The other side of this is, I don't know what home testing kit you bought, but we certainly do not recommend you use those for anything important. You know, pH fine, arsenic, no way. They just, they're qualitative at best, and they have a lot of false positives and false negatives. You can't be sure using those, and some are just completely unreliable. And that's what we found. It's worth it to get your test done by a certified lab every 3 to 5 years to be sure what you've got going. That'd be my advice. So more on bacteria. This is important because after running my kitchen faucet for 5 minutes, I'm just going to read this, collecting water sample. They use mytapscore.com, which is a service we've recommended to people for testing. They found that HPC bacteria was too numerous to count. So this obviously scared this homeowner, which, you know, without any more information, I don't blame you. But how often is this lab anomaly versus a true well issue? The well tested 3 years ago, same faucet, didn't have any coliform E. coli. If both are true, which they very well could be true, just for the record, and what could cause a dramatic change in how they go about tracing this? A homeowner, so HPC is heterotrophic plate count. is a measure of all bacteria in a sample, all heterotrophs, which is most bacteria. Now, some of them are pathogens, like E. coli, but many are harmless. So you need to realize that groundwater, natural groundwater, is full of bacteria. We drink it every day. It's not the harmful bacteria where we get those out, right? We do things to make sure and make that safe. Some people may just cringe at the thought of their groundwater having bacteria in it, but it always has and it always will be. Most are harmless, and it's okay. Iron bacteria, sulfate-reducing bacteria, methogenic bacteria, we find them all in groundwater, and they have no bearing on water quality, or they have no health effects on humans or anyone. We breathe bacteria in, I mentioned that earlier. They just exist everywhere in our environment. You know, our bodies are used to that. They're not a problem. That's why we have you know, the blood cells that attack those things, right? So they don't have any effect on us, but it's not really a relevant test for a private well owner, because it's going to always be positive, for one, and it's really used in things like to do 2 tests, one now and one in a week. Has it changed? A lot of this is done for consistency and tracking, either in a water supply or in their distribution system, so they know if, like, they're adding the right amount of chlorine, so that they're getting chlorine residual at the end of their distribution line for a public water supply that may have 2 miles of pipe going to, you know, 1,000 homes. And so that's how that should be used. But also, I wanted to let you know, you know, MyTapScore is actually a pretty good outfit. We don't necessarily recommend any company. That's not our job, but we have recommended folks go to them because it's so convenient. And they have a blog, which I copied this from their blog. I took a screenshot. The highlighted area is the one I'm going to read. So while HPC is indeed an indicator of overall bacterial presence in your water, it does not necessarily indicate a health risk. I think that's well said, and what I was trying to say in many more words. So if whatever else is on your analysis, even if you get it done by a private lab, some other private lab, this is all publicly available. You can go look on TapScore's page, or you can call us. That's what our help center's for. But there's good information out there. And this actually really explains the issue you have. And I get, when you see that, you know, there's too many bacteria to count, that's a scary thing. And unless you knew what HPC was, there's no way that you would understand that. So it's a really good question. And I think it'll help a lot of people who may have ran across this before and not been willing to ask. Possible contamination. My wife has a chicken coop just 15 feet from the well. Seriously, how much risk is there? Well, so it totally depends on the site conditions. I've talked about this already, how the well was constructed, where you're getting your water from in the well. You know, if it's the old hand dug well that I grew up on, it's definitely a risk. If there was a chicken coop within 15 feet of our well, we'd be able to detect DNA tests today and find chicken DNA in our well. I bet you money. But if it's properly constructed and properly grouted, which is the seal you put around the casing to fill in the rest of the borehole, that's usually a cement or a clay cement or clay that won't allow water to move through it. And let's say, you know, here in Illinois, we have, in Champaign County, we have a sand and gravel aquifer that starts at about 125 or 130 feet. A lot of the wells are around 200 feet deep. The water's only coming in the well at the well screen, which is at the bottom 5 feet. And so if it's well constructed, there is no way anything, pesticides, any other chemical, any bacteria, any nitrate that's applied on the field is going to get to that aquifer. And because there's too much clay between the two that stops it. Even the natural glacial environment is such that there's several aquitards which don't necessarily prevent, but they really restrict flow. And by the time they get there, it'd be hundreds of years, and they would be broken down into other constituents. So understanding that, you know, if you're in a really sandy area, that's why sand points aren't considered safe anymore, and most states don't allow them anymore. Some states still do. But if you're in a really sandy environment with a shallow water table, and you take a hammer and you hammer in 15 feet to get your water, expect it to be contaminated, because it's just sand at the surface. Everything runs in, and water picks up stuff that's on the ground and takes it with it. So, or if it's karst geology, sinkholes, If you've ever been down in Kentucky or Tennessee or Southern Illinois or Indiana, there's all these sinkholes, and you see where some of the folks who live down there have thrown bales of wire and even old vehicles in these sinkholes. That's the aquifer. It's going down into the aquifer. That's why in a lot of karst areas, 80% of the samples come back positive for E. coli, because they're raising livestock over these open holes that go right into the water that people are drinking. So that's the information you need to know if that chicken coop is going to be a problem or not. Okay, can a homeowner test for PFAS, and does home insurance play a role in assisting the homeowners to pay for a test at that expense? Okay, because PFAS chemicals are so prevalent, I mean, in everything. They're in the air, they're in the dust, they're in our skin, they're in our bodies, they're on our clothes, they're in our water, they're everywhere. So there are guidelines on how to collect a sample that can be really rigorous. An average homeowner isn't going to be able to do that. I know for research purposes, there's folks here who have taken a class on how to sample for PFAS. But the labs that do PFAS testing understand that. And so if they send you a sample kit, it should have instructions on it being very diligent about what you're wearing, that you wash your hands right before you collect the sample. It's best if you use gloves, the nitrile gloves, and that none of that stuff has PFAS in it. And just be really careful collecting the sample, and you can minimize the risk. There's all this talk about doing that. You can't trust a sample. I disagree, only because I talked to a state health department that has some money for doing PFAS sampling, and they've just taken their regular precautions they do for every other type of testing, and they've had they use blanks and trip blanks and duplicates, which are ways to have quality assurance and quality control over the samples you're collecting, and they've had no issues with false PFAS results because of contaminating the sample. So I think in an abundance of caution, I agree with everything in the research community that they're doing, but I think you as a homeowner, as long as you follow the instructions and you make sure you're being really diligent in the way you collect that sample and nothing's touching it and all those things, it should be okay. And you should be able to use what the lab gives you for instructions. And as far as a home insurance policy, we haven't heard of anything. I know Aaron looked up this question, and yeah, I've certainly never heard of a home insurance covering your testing. I'm sure there's an insurance company out there that'd be willing to look at that. Probably be costly, more than the cost of your sample. So yeah, and then who knows what that means if you have a positive. So it just doesn't seem like they'd be the right folks for that necessarily. Local government. Okay, so yeah, so Sally answered this question. She gave me a really detailed response, and there's a lot of good information in there. And we're going to eventually end up putting that in our help center as one of those questions that get answered. But so this question is really about dealing with, this is a local environmental health professional. They're talking to a person who either them or their loved one has been diagnosed with something really serious, like breast cancer, childhood cancer, epilepsy, Parkinson's. There's a list here. So what can that person do to be helpful, understanding that, it's probably one, there's not a lot that can be done at that point, other than I ran into this case just this summer. People want to know what's going on and why, and it is frustrating, and you just want answers, and there aren't always answers to give. But folks also have to realize that their well water is only one place where they may be getting some of those things. But what Sally's working on is a response basically about what you need to learn. The key is a clear understanding of what you can really do is have a clear understanding of their well and well water situation first. So then you can advocate for them with others, like health professionals, or clinicians if necessary, or with somebody else in the industry. And until if you don't, like this happened to me this summer, I'm not a health professional, but I am a private well expert. So I was asked by a health department to go meet with a homeowner who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. First time I had to do that, but when I went to the home and met with them, we were all there. It was clear that they have an old dug well. It's their garden where they used, pesticides and bug dust and all those things their whole lives, was 5 feet from the well. It's only a 22-foot hand dug well. It's right near a state highway, and it's maybe 20 feet from a farm field. And it's been that way for 40 years. And so those are all bad things, right? But then when we sat down and were talking about all those things, it also turned out the guy worked at a chemical factory for 30 years. And so, there's a lot of information there that but having a candid conversation about what it could be, what I explained to them is, even sampling today and finding a pesticide in their well doesn't mean that's what caused his problem. It'd be really hard to prove that with all the other things. Like, I grew up on a farm. I used bug dust when I was a kid without ever using gloves. My dad gave me a hand sprayer to spray around our buildings to kill all the weeds. I did that without a mask or gloves. It could be that catches up to me as well someday. But the reality is that even from 2 years ago, the water quality could be very different. And I don't know enough about cancer to really give him any kind of advice there, other than to say, I know it'd be very difficult to pin down what caused it being their well or not. And again, it's human nature to want to know how and why this happened. But I don't know that in those cases, one, you can give them the answers they want, but what you can do is be there for them and explain things and try to get them as much information that's in your wheelhouse as you can. Because luckily I had the health department there with me, and that made a difference as well. So not a good answer to this, but again, I think if you're going to deal with it at all, you need to really dive in and give them the time and be willing to have that kind of a conversation. Hopefully it just doesn't happen very often. So, and I don't know if that's the best answer. That's how I dealt with it. It was a very difficult thing for sure. Okay, what type of whole house filter do I need for well water? I was told a filter that is a tank that backwashes is what I need. Could you give me some options? I don't even know what this type of filter is called. I've tried the Home Depot version. Unfortunately, in a month or two, it clogs up and we have to change the filter. Water pressure drops significantly if we don't. I'm assuming this is kind of a typical 5-micron filter, or it's an iron filter, which I've run into several cases in Illinois where someone with an iron filter even has an advanced system. There's so much iron that they're pulling out of their water that's clogging up within weeks. It's a real issue that I don't know that there's a great solution to. In this case, this gentleman has to change out this filter about every 6 weeks. And the black is a combination of oxidized iron and manganese. If it were just iron, it'd probably be the rust color that a lot of people are used to seeing. And again, I'm assuming you're talking about a filter, an advanced filter that's like one of these cloth filters, but you're backwashing it to clean it out every so often so that it can work again. And that's just so you don't have to keep buying these cartridges and things like that. My questions is, have you had the water tested? Can you give us more information about what folks have said about what you do need? Also, what your Home Depot version of this was. And you really need to have water analysis to understand what's in your water. I mean, if your iron's really high, and if that's what it is, all that would be helpful. And I guess my question to you is, can you share analysis if you had it done? Or other information? You can email us at info@privatewellclass.org, and we can try to help you out. Or call our hotline. Sally or Aaron, either one would be glad to take down more information and start looking into this for you. Whole house system. Do I need to advise my clients to have a whole house filtration system? And so my first thought was, you're either a realtor or a driller. I'm not sure. You have clients, so that's likely it's one of the two. But regardless, going back to our approach to this is you need to have a water test. That's really what you should be recommending. Once you've had a water test and you know what's in the water, then you can decide if you need to add any kind of treatment. Unless there's a known problem, which wasn't in this question. So whole house filtration can be a number of things. A softener for hardness, iron and manganese filter like the one we just looked at, chlorinator or UV to kill bacteria. Those are usually whole house. Other things like an RO unit, for removing arsenic is usually a POU device, which the difference here, point of entry, POE, is for the whole house. It's when the water comes in the house, you treat all of it. So you do that for iron so you don't have stained porcelain, right? Or it's not staining your clothes. You do that for bacteria because you don't want to take a shower in water that's got bacteria that you might be breathing in as well. But for most things, or a lot of things, a point of use, which is you put it right at the point where you're using the water. So you see a lot of RO units like under a sink, is a better option because they're less expensive to purchase and maintain. It really, again, comes down to having the water sample first and understanding what's in the water and if you even need it. Because, some groundwater, people are very fortunate. There is nothing wrong with their water. It's not hard. It has no contaminants. You have to do absolutely nothing to it. And there are a lot of even public water supplies that 30 years ago weren't required to even chlorinate because they had tested and their water was fine and didn't have bacteria in it. And that's changed. And those were usually really small public water supplies, like a residential subdivision on one well, but they met the definition of what had to be regulated by the state and the feds. So, but we've changed since then because we've learned a lot more things can be in water. But it's again, testing is really what needs to be recommended. And if you're a realtor, I wouldn't buy or sell a house without having a water sample done first. I tell people when we do these webinars, we do a webinar just for realtors, and for each point that I make, if you're the buyer, here's why. If you're the seller, here's why. Because it's so much better to have dealt with the problem in advance. And I just had a case last summer, not in 24, but in 23, where someone that my son I went to school with, his parents decided to move out in the country. They're going to buy a house, so they called me, and there wasn't a water sample that had been done, so they decided they wanted to get a water sample first. The homeowner threw a fit, but they said then they weren't going to buy it. They got a water sample. It had bacteria in it. They had it chlorinated. The guy who had to come chlorinate it, they hired somebody. The owner did, admitted he really didn't know what he was doing, and so they walked away from that house because they wanted to have safe drinking water. And it's really, it shouldn't matter that much because if you don't have safe water, it's a really limiting thing, or can be, or expensive if you're going another route. I experience distinct physical symptoms if I drink or cook with my water, so I only use it for bathing, washing dishes, blah, 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 and use bottled water for cooking. And there's a lot more here. Basically, you're asking for advice. If it's distinctly making you sick, then there's a problem. And so I know you mentioned that it came back fine for bacteria, and you said basic testing. Basic testing doesn't tell me anything. I need to look at your sample results, or we need to know what you've actually tested for, because you should get a full test done, inorganics, metals, all that, and then take that to your clinician and also to your local health department or local health district and ask them for advice. There's got to be something there. And it's likely, to me, in my own opinion, if it's that acute, it almost has to be biological or bacteriological. But once you've done a complete analysis, inorganics, metals, all that stuff, if the water, I don't know what else to tell you other than you need to understand your chemistry and the biology of your well water before you can really do anything. So, and you talked about installing an RO unit sometime this year. There's things that RO does not remove. I mentioned arsenic earlier. If it's in the wrong state, it's not oxidized, it'll go through an RO unit. And so you have to know that, or put in some kind of oxidizing filter in advance of the RO unit in order to be sure that it's going to remove it. So, could be wasting your money on an RO unit if you haven't tested. That's my advice here. And I'd be glad to follow up with you if you want to pursue this. Again, just email us. Katie gets those emails. She'll forward it to me. And we can see what's going on there. Can you tell us about what happens when an aquifer is low and things get stirred up? this is a big concern in my community where wells are going dry in some places and contaminated with minerals and E. coli and others. So I'm not sure of the situation here. And at first, Sally looked into this question too. We were thinking it was more about an aquifer going dry. That seems very unlikely in that if you have a well that's actually in an aquifer and it's got a pump or an intake, you don't put the pump intake or the pump itself at the bottom of the well, because there's always sediment in wells and it will stir that up. So if it's because of lowering, the water level is getting lower, and I'm guessing that this is a large diameter well, shallow well, hand dug or bored well. That seems more likely. I know the pump, because it's a big open space, whenever the pump kicks on, it's just an intake pipe, but it can cause a lot faster flow towards the intake, and that's going to stir stuff up off the bottom. And I think that's probably what's going on. But when it's finished in an aquifer, yeah, your pump isn't set down at the bottom. It's not going to make a difference. The water level isn't going to stir up things. And so I don't think it could be a well that's in a, quote, real aquifer in that case. And Sally may have some different opinion there, but I think we'll put this on our help center too. We just haven't talked about it. So yeah, I've just not heard of lowering water levels causing bacterial contamination either, like that in an aquifer, because that's coming from the surface, and depending on where the aquifer is, it may have no bearing. And so really the one thing I do know is that when you lower and raise water levels in a bedrock aquifer, you're exposing that rock to air where it may not have been exposed to air ever before. And so if there's any metals that are in that rock, it can oxidize them and they will end up in your water. And we need more info on what your situation is here to give you a better answer. But I'm guessing, every dry summer, even in Illinois, we have areas where they're all dug and bored wells, large diameter wells, because there is no real aquifer there, and people haul water. They're running out of water. I know our well, I actually had to go down and clean it out when I was a kid. It's only 14 foot deep. We just put a ladder in it and went down in there, and the whole bottom is full of this, sediment and stuff. But that's because they're unlined bricks, uncemented bricks that make up the wall, and so everything comes in with the water, pieces of dirt, you name it. And that's likely that what's causing that, stirring up that stuff there. Okay, so it is 3. I apologize for going a little bit longer than I should have, so we can go to the other questions. Katie very gratefully sent me the link I need, so I will pull that up and make that full screen and make it larger. So can you see that okay, Katie?
Yep, that looks good from here.
Okay, so it was mentioned that 2 states do not have well codes. I was just trying to be nice to those states. I mentioned it a lot. It's Pennsylvania and Alaska. So in Pennsylvania, they don't have well construction code, and they have a licensed driller program, but they really don't have one. Because you and I can go get online, pay $60 and become a licensed well driller in Pennsylvania. There's no continuing education requirements, any of those things. I had somebody one time, when I said they don't license drillers in Pennsylvania, they complained and said, oh yes, we do. Well, they require you to have a license from the state to drill, but it doesn't mean you're qualified. It even says that right on their website. So yeah, in Alaska, they have a groundwater work group that they formed a couple of years ago. And COVID kind of shortchanged that, but they've been working to try to develop codes and a licensure program for Alaska, which, every state should have those basic things, especially for the materials you're using to put in a well. And the one thing I will say about Pennsylvania is that some of the local watershed districts and other local aid government entities have created their own laws that require, like we had one speak at our 2019 conference, a guy who was with the watershed district. They require their drillers to be master drillers through the National Groundwater Association, which is a program you can go through as a driller with NGWA, which is the National Organization for Drillers and Scientists and Engineers and all those folks. In order to become a master driller, you have to pass an exam and do all this kind of stuff. So at least they're, locally, some folks are taking care of it in some ways. Does your department have plans for any webinars on the topic of PFAS in the future? If we're going to do that, it's probably not a bad idea. but it certainly won't be us giving the presentation. So I hadn't thought of it that way. I know enough to be dangerous and some of the basic things that a well owner would need to know. But we'll probably have, we are going to hold a private well conference in May. It's going to be in Bloomington, Illinois, which I forgot to put that slide in. We just got everything finalized near the end of May. We'll probably have several talks on PFAS from people. Those will be recorded. And so this conference is not for well owners, it's for professionals. And but we record them and put them on YouTube. And for instance, we did have somebody talk about PFAS at our 2019 conference. That was early in the game. It was very technical though, and we need to have some folks on to talk more practically about what like a county health department can do, or a driller can do, or a lab can do to help a homeowner with a well. So that's a very good point. Today, we don't have any plans, but I think now, after seeing your question, there's several folks I can reach out to that do a lot of PFAS work. And if I can get their time, one of them was Dr. McDonald Gibson that was on that podcast. She does a lot of PFAS work, works with communities of well owners, and she samples all over the country, and she would be a great speaker for this webinar, but it's a matter of getting her time. So we will try to do that. That's what I can tell you, because it's a really good idea. What kind of HPC can tease out the harmful type and volume of bacteria like E. coli? They can't. HPC is just a test to look at all types of bacteria. It doesn't differentiate. So you have to do a more specific test to determine E. coli or coliform. And so you need to do a standard coliform and E. coli test. Just like you can test for, there's testing for Legionella, there's testing for Pseudomonas, a lot of other bacteria you can do specific tests on, but that's not what HPC is for. It's really just, this is all the bacteria that can be in a well or in a water. And so there is no HPC for that. That is actually the name of a specific test that's meant to just give you all the bacteria. So you'd want to do an E. coli or coliform test. And those are good, and coliform is used as an indicator organism, because if you have it, it means there's a pathway for other things. And if you want to get into more different types of bacteria testing, labs can do that, but those are all specific tests. You'd have to talk to individual labs that do biological testing like that. Okay, number 4, if a well is not in the state records, do homeowners need to self-submit data to get it certified? I'm not sure what state you're in, but there is no, quote, certification per se. So for instance, when our lab was doing a lot of private well analysis, which they don't anymore, which is one reason why we sometimes send people to MyTabScore, many times a homeowner would request a water test, and when we look at our records, we don't have their log. So we would get as much information from the homeowner as we could. If they know the depth, they know who, whatever information we could get, usually not a lot, at least location, and then we'd put the chemical analysis in our well logs as the log. And just mention, this was a log that we don't have a well log for, no geology. We don't know who the driller is or when it was drilled, but here's what we do know. And so we actually, one of the wells I use in one of our classes is someone who does not have a well log, but we had them in our records because they had a chemistry log done. They had a chemistry sample taken in 1965. And we determined that finally we figured out the well was from the late 40s. But only because of the other wells in the area and the way it was drilled was kind of special. So if some states will certify your well, I'm not sure what that's about. I need to know what state you're in and do some checking. But if you want to know more about your well, if you've ever had anybody work on the well, or if you can ask around, local well drillers may know who drilled that well. And maybe, it was Bob's well drilling, and he hurt his back and stopped drilling about 30 years ago. I mean, that's a very common type of issue. I think Anderson Well Drilling has all their well records, because sometimes a well driller will have a record that they keep for themselves that may not make it to the state for whatever reason. I'm not saying it may have been before they were required, or, sometimes there's different reasons why that happens. But sometimes you can go directly to the driller and they may have a log too. And if all else fails, you could ask a well driller to come out, and it would probably cost you some money, but you could ask them to pull the pump, take a water level measurement, take a depth of well measurement, and they can tell you how deep your well is. And then from geologic information in the area, you could probably determine what aquifer it's in if it's fairly deep. You know, and you can. Some people would be tempted to just put a bolt on a string and drop it down your well. You know, if the pump is in the well and it has a spacer, I've seen those things get hung up so many times. We've had steel tapes which are maybe a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch wide, less than that, probably 3/8 of an inch wide and very thin, like a regular tape that you'd use for measuring anything. No end on it, no nothing. And I've dropped that down a well and got it stuck when seems like there's nothing that it could get stuck on. So I don't recommend doing that to get that information for sure. So yeah, you can always call us too and can get some more information. You know, yeah, I think if you're talking about getting it certified, I'm thinking you must be out west where some of that stuff matters. You know, the first and right prior appropriation stuff. But I don't know without knowing your state. I know that when there was nothing to certify here, we would certainly like to know about your well if you're in Illinois, and we would create a log with whatever information we did have, just so we know there's a well there. But that'd be it. Can the speaker talk more about an ozonator in well water storage tank, which is being recommended by my well person? I want to get the speaker's perspective. So the speaker will have to look into this. So ozone is also, I believe, used as an oxidant or can be. I have no experience with it, but it might be, yeah, I'll have to look into it, to be honest. I'd be glad to, but I don't know. I mean, is this a situation where you have a very low yield well, so you have a storage tank because you can't get enough water from a regular well? And because I've run across that, certainly, where basically a well can only pump 1/2 gallon a minute, so they pump it 24/7 at that rate and fill a tank so that it's always available when they need it. But I mean, I could certainly look into that. You just need to email me because we can certainly give you an objective opinion on what that is. I'd even be glad to talk to the well driller. So, yeah. So I always offer, every once in a while you'll run into someone who has a well drilled and they didn't get the log and they didn't file it with the state, and the well driller doesn't want to share it. And yeah, your county probably, okay, so let me finish this. So you're, and so I've offered to call the well driller about the log because I will turn them in if they're not doing what they're supposed to do and they're actually keeping that information from the homeowner who paid for it, which is why in our class, one of the things we recommend is that if you're getting a well drilled, in the 10 lesson class, when you read through that, that you always make sure your contract with a well driller includes you getting a copy of all the information, including the log. So, and all the information about the pump and all those things, because and once they're done, yeah, anyway. Yeah, California, you know, 10 years ago, I couldn't even talk to a county health department and get information about a private well because it was all protected. It had to be the homeowner who did it. And now everything's public data. And as far as being permitted, I'm not sure that can be done after the fact. Your county you need to talk to them about what the rules are there, because I'm just not familiar with that. You know, RCAC is the RCAP affiliate that's based in California. I can also get you their contact information, or you can go to their website. It's just rcac.org and look for their private well program. Actually, I just Google RCAC private well program and you'll get a page that's that. And there'll be a contact there. They're more likely to know those rules or how to help you with that situation. So if you do that, let me know, or if you want me to get you the contact, just email us. Okay, I am completely overwhelmed with RO units at POU. What can I do to drill down to a reasonable number like 3 to select from? Oh my gosh. Right, so we also talk about this in our class, but I'm sure it is overwhelming, all the different things that are available. One of the things we say in our class is that, you know, RO units like everything else, are meant to remove certain things. There's a program, a third-party certifier program that reputable companies will spend the money and use to verify that their equipment actually removes what it's supposed to. So there are three main certification bodies: UL, Underwriters Lab, NSF, which is National Sanitation Foundation. So you've seen these NSF symbols or UL symbols, like even on your light bulbs in the day, right? Those light bulbs are certified by UL to last so long. And the third one is the Water Quality Association Gold Seal. So they also, the Water Quality Association, certifies treatment equipment, a lot of it for homeowners or for companies that deal with, homeowner related POU devices. And so the main thing we tell everybody is that you make sure the device you buy has one of those three symbols on it and it's rated for the type of method that you're trying to solve here. So if it's for arsenic, I think that's method, it's either ANSI NSF standard 53 or 58, I can't remember which one, is for RO units, and the other one's for media for arsenic and metals, I believe. And so you need to make sure it has that symbol for that type of standard to make sure you're taking out what you're supposed to take out. That is a lot. If you Google, I'm going to write in here. If you Google, oh, that's fine. MDH home water treatment. That's Minnesota Department of Health home water treatment. They have a document that they've put together just a couple of years ago that is kind of the definitive guide on home water treatment. It talks about every type of device. It talks about the three certifiers. You can also, actually, Katie, don't we link to that on our resources page?
I believe so.
Yeah, so I think if you go on our page and go under the resources lesson 10, you'll see that MDH home water treatment listed, and you can click on it and it'll take you to their page to download it. But it is by far the most comprehensive document on treatment, costs, problems, you name it, what it takes. Like, RO uses a lot of water. It wastes, 4 gallons for every gallon that you actually get, I think, something like that. And I'm not a treatment expert. I know, like I said, I know enough about some things to be dangerous, but like the ozonator, obviously it's creating ozone. And I think that's being used in some places as a disinfectant or, oxidant to disinfect. And so I'm sure that's what that's for. And avoids having a chlorine taste. That's probably why they're doing that. Yeah, so. Okay, well, I kept everybody longer than intended. I apologize. Thank you for those that stayed. Yeah, if you ask for, don't forget to, let me get to the bottom here. There we go. So yeah, certificates for at least 90% of the webinar. That's the bottom line. And the platform we're using, GoToWebinar, tracks that. So yeah, if you weren't here for at least that time, you can't get a certificate from us. So thank you for being here, and talk to you next month.